Hello and welcome to the Beginner's Handbook. I'm Jordan.
I'm Jamie.
And in this episode we are going to be talking about spooky Halloween themed stuff because it's Halloween. So today it's really similar to one of the episodes we're doing recently. I don't know if you've seen it yet or not. We're going to talk about some of our experiences with horror themed games, so maybe not something that made us shake in our boots or anything like that, but certainly we want to talk about some of our favourite moments that we've had maybe this year, or even just going back and casting the stones a bit further to see what kind of scary things that maybe we enjoyed in the games that we've played or ran.
Yeah, and as well, if we can dissect it down a little further without kind of running on too much time wise and things, then we'll maybe kind of pull out some of the elements that gave it that little bit of kind of drama, and it kind of up the level of fear. But we don't want to go into that too much. This is more just kind of story time with Jamie and Jordan.
Yep, a special bonus episode, if you want to call it that. So basically, I think then we'll start off with the question we always ask is a question, and that is, what, as a player or a GM, has there been, what's your favourite time, or what's your favourite experience you've had in a game, whether it be a scary sequence or a sequence in a horror themed game, or even a scary sequence in a non-horror themed game, because you can have horror elements in games without them needing to be hardcore horror games. So as a player, what's your favourite one of them? As a GM, maybe what have you done to actually try and encourage or set up that atmosphere for your players? We would like to know a bit more about it.
Yeah, that's the thing, and it's always great hearing from other people and what their ideas are. And when it comes to horror or fear or anything like that, it's always going to be interesting hearing what people find scary, what people find that gets that level of fear, that kind of their heart going. And how it can range with people from something incredibly small to something like really big that has to happen to get that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we've had games where we might come into some of them later, but we've had games where we've been like, okay, we've been told it'll be super scary and super horrible and all that stuff. I mean, I'm out of probably our group, I'm probably the guy that knows the most horror stuff, because that's just always been my thing. Like I started off, even with role-playing games, it was Esoterrorists and Call of Cthulhu. We never played Delta Green, but that's one that's on the list. But anyway, most of the horror games, and I eventually moved into D&D with yourself, Jamie, and then like some of the guys we normally play with. So, but it's funny because some of these games that we almost get the warnings about before we play, we kind of went, was that all? Whereas other players at the same game were just like, that was so intense, It's funny just to see what makes people tick and see how it affects people.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And again, a couple of the examples that are coming up, then again, that's gonna appear. But I think what we'll do is we'll get talking and start on some of the games and things that we've been and that we've seen. So the first one I think we'll talk about is one that both myself and Jordan were part of, which was based on real events.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was based on real events, and that was based on the Franklin expedition. So if anybody knows about that, then you already know it's quite a grim setting to start off with. And for anybody that doesn't, basically there was an Arctic expedition that went out, and then basically everybody disappeared from it, and then I can't remember the exact sort of time scale and things of when it was refound and rediscovered, but when the people were found, there was like different people that were disfigured, there was people buried in makeshift graves, and there was a lot of pretty grim and horrific stuff. So when the game started, unbeknownst to the DM at the time, who was the author, for anybody who's seen previous episodes, we all got kind of trigger warnings before it happened. But unbeknownst to him, So the timing in this, and I can't remember if I said this to you or not, the timing in this was a bit suspicious because there was a documentary on TV over here, and then maybe about 4 weeks later we played this game.
I didn't know that, no.
Yeah, so I'd also seen that. Well, I never asked, but I'm suspecting that he'd watched this documentary that I'd also watched, and then he'd taken that and ran the game with it. So as we're going along, you know, kind of a lot of the spoilers were kind of already out there for me. I knew what was happening, I knew what was coming up. And one of the things that the DM done, because, you know, the bits of it were grim, like he had essentially pictures from the expedition that was used to kind of help set the scene and things. So the ones that were a bit more grim, everybody got a kind of, you don't need to look if you don't want, and it was kind of passed so that nobody could see it around the table, and then you either looked at it if you wanted to or not, which is good for, you know, everybody's kind of sensitivity and things, you know, and not freaking anybody out. But at the same point, it sort of slowed the pace of the game down. So at that point, rather than keeping the fear going of there's somebody else, here's something horrific that's happened to them, and you're building and layering upon it, to obviously with the Franklin expedition there wasn't, you know, monsters or anything kicking about that happened. It was a series of unfortunate events, but so rather than the pace going and building, layering and building and layering, because these kind of graphic elements, not graphic as in horrific content, but like pictures and things, because they appeared every so often, it stopped the flow. So rather than getting that kind of level of tension, it was building and then it was falling back, and it was building and it was falling back, and it was building and it was falling back. So for me personally with that, although it was in that horror theme, it lost a lot of the edge from it, because I was already aware of the events. I'd already had a good bit of background information on it, so I knew where things were going to go. And then I went, well, because, you know, like this person was found here, then what you could do is you could potentially link that to this or this. And so I was kind of puzzling things out as it was going on. So I was a couple of steps ahead of the other players that were there. And again, the passing the images around and things, it killed a lot of the tension for me. But how did you find the
I was a wee bit the other way. I actually enjoyed all that stuff, because I didn't, weirdly, because I'm into all that, like there's a Dyatlov Pass incident, which was like so many conspiracy theories about that, but that was the only one I knew of that sort of nature, because of like the film that they'd done and things. I think it's monsters in the film. I never seen it, but so I didn't know anything about the Franklin expedition, and I'm going, oh yeah, I can't remember if you said we used Call of Cthulhu for this as well, so it had all the sanity stuff brought into it. You know, so I quite liked the lore aspect almost of it all. The stuff like pictures, like it was going around the table, I'm like, can't wait to see it, you know. They're pretty crazy stuff, but I'm also like, cool, like super scary. But I liked, for me, it fed into the theme and unpleasantness a bit more, but I also didn't know anything about it until that night. I think if I remember right, it took some supernatural approach, and I don't know if I ever finished that game though. I think we spoke about this before, but I don't think
we did finish it, because it was just as a sort of one shot. So it was kind of go find out what happened. That's the briefs. You go and you start investigating and try to figure out what's going on, and then you kind of get led into where the kind of main supernatural things happening. I think it ended up in some form of fight, and then it was, you know, that's it, well done, you survived, and you know, you all go home a little bit more damaged than when you appeared.
I don't even remember all that, but it was definitely a game I liked. I'm a sucker for anything Arctic though, like Even like the movie, I love The Thing, for example, and like movies like that isolate you from people and things, and they give you that sense. I felt like that was somewhat portrayed quite well. It's hard to remember though, we're speaking about years and years ago, but I did quite enjoy the game overall. But it's interesting because it was probably, well, there was a documentary not long before it, because I'm surprised, because that would have been something I would have watched. You know, that was back when I watched TV and things, which I don't do anymore. But
yeah, again, it was on one of these channels that kind of normally put stuff on, and it's either hit or miss whether the documentaries actually got a decent bit of information in it, or whether it's like just made up nonsense and like they repeat the same 4 or 5 sentences and then go to an ad break, and then they recap in the 4 or 5 sentences, and then add an extra one in.
Most Haunted or something.
Yeah, basically that kind of thing. And you're like, wait a minute, there's only like 8 minutes worth of a documentary here. So it's one of those kind of things. But actually, it was half decent. But like with pace and things and that, and like with images going about, how did you find that? Did you find that kind of killed it a little bit for you? Or? I
can't really remember. I don't remember feeling like it's slowing down, but then for me, I suppose the difference is like this was all new to me, all this stuff. So I was kind of learning a bit about it, and I was seeing like the state of some of these could what would the actual respectful word be, the remains that were left. But you've also got the stuff around, like there was like, what was it? There was like Bible scriptures and stuff written, like really weird, almost like, I mean, you've seen the tropes in horror films for years and years now, but it was stuff that would actually happened in the 1800s, whenever it was. So I found all that super interesting, because I was kind of seeing these clips and stuff, whereas you were familiar with it though. But I don't remember either. I just remember going, oh cool, handouts.
Well, the thing with like the bits from the Bible, and again the kind of background for that was that, like, as the people were dying here and there, then whoever was left was inscribing passages from the Bible as they were burying them and things. But it was kind of strange bits of the Bible to pick, and I can't remember any of the quotes off the top of my head, but it was kind of the sort of stranger elements of it, rather than like your kind of standard ones that you would hear if you were at a funeral or whatever, which then added to the mystery and added to the kind of horror nature of it, because it was kind of not completely disconnected, but the kind of further in the events were kind of unfolding, and the more bizarre the quotes were coming from as everybody's starting to kind of lose grip and lose control of the situation. So the likes of that, because like the quotes getting read out, you know, so somebody finds one of the graves and it's, oh, you see that it's got written on it, blah 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 blah. You know, that's the way that it's read out, not read out, sorry, that's the way it was put forward in the game, so there was never a break in rhythm. Whereas with pictures, because it was, here's what it looks like, right, okay, first person has to look and make sure nobody else sees it to pass it to the next person just in case, and round the table it went. Because we're all looking at the picture and passing it around and whatever else, and you're going, right, do you want to see it? No, you don't. All right, but you do, right, okay, and you're kind of having to do all that sort of a stuff as it's going around. Then the DM at that point is waiting for everybody to look at it, so that then he's not starting to talk while somebody goes, oh right, okay, you were, and then is cutting across the conversation and what's happening, so that nobody misses anything from the story. So that kind of side of things is what I'm meaning about it kind of breaking the rhythm. Whereas when he's reading out the quotes, then you can read out the quotes because it's just a quote and it's what's written there, and so on and so on.
What would you have done to stop or reduce the kind of breaking narrative or the breaking pace? I don't really remember it that much, so I can't really say, but I'm interested to hear then what you would have done maybe differently. Like, remove the pictures, would you have just said, these want to see it, yes or no, as a group? Yes, show it, no, don't show it. Like, what would have maybe been a solution that, if it was to go back to that time and plant a wee thought for how to do it maybe a bit better?
I would either have removed it, just because ultimately, what did it add?
I suppose it was maybe shock value or something.
Yeah, but the thing with it is, you go, right, well, if you're worried about people being creeped out with it or getting upset or whatever, then why take that level of risk?
Aye.
Whereas if you got a picture of the ship stuck in ice, it's not going to freak anybody out. Help set the scene. Something else, help set the scene. This is a picture of one of the tins of rations that they would have had on the expedition. You know, that all helps set the scene, but it doesn't detract away from anything, you know, and you're not then worried about people going, it will be fine, and looking at it and then again getting upset, freaking out with it. So I would have either removed it or before the game had started, when this is, you know, what one element of what I'm doing. If you are going to get, you know, if you're sensitive about it, just when it comes round to you, just pass it on to the next person. I'll pass it round clockwise, it'll get it back to me, and then I'll get it out the road, keep it face down, look at it, then when you're done, next person. And I'm going to keep the story going, so that, you know, for anybody who doesn't want to see it, they've got something to focus on, and I'm not going to get distracted with that and maybe accidentally glimpse something or whatever. That would probably be the two ways I would do it, with the simplest way being just to remove it.
Yeah, do you know, that's something to think about when we're talking about the next bits, because I remember liking that aspect of it, because I mean, I like it. It's macabre and all that, it's kind of grim, that's how I like all that stuff, so I was kind of like, that's pretty cool. But I suppose the thing is then, well, why is it going in there in the first place? Like, if it's just purely for shock, like there's stuff about the whole, you can get the X card and stuff for your games, and I'm not really that big a fan of it, and the reason for it isn't because I think you shouldn't be offended at games. It's not to do with that. It's more to do with, well, if I need to use the X card, or if someone feels the need to use an X card, one, I'm not sure how I didn't figure that one out before putting that theme in there, but because I would probably sound check or kind of safety check everyone before a game.
Yeah.
But two, if something's going to be that intense, are you not just better putting on like the curtains over it, you know, putting the curtain call and kind of fading through it or speeding past it instead of repeating the grisly detail? You know, because there's loads of games I do that have a lot of violence and like a lot of violence in it, but there's definitely never horrible sexual content or anything. And any games, like, not games that I've made, but especially ones that I've done that are published, they might have that as a theme. If it's Cult Divinity Lost you're playing, there's very likely, like, there's a whole part or kind of dimension type thing that's all about sex. That's the whole thing, you know. So a lot of stories in that, or especially some of the bigger and better stories, they usually still have lots of these themes of abuse, and they kind of encourage kind of going into all that. But for somebody like myself, I'm kind of like, but it's not adding anything, and it doesn't need to be there for shock value, because people are adult enough to understand what's going on without needing all the grisly details. Now, if you're playing Alien, you want a bit of violence in there, but you don't need to. I have a lot of things like somebody's head get pulled apart in a game I've done recently, but I just need to say what I've said there. I don't need to explain how the skull splits and the tissues rip and then the aortic blood spray fires. I don't need that detail. So that's where, like, things like the X card and that, like, I don't particularly I'm not a fan of it, because if I feel the need to use it, I'm probably putting something in there I maybe shouldn't. So when it comes to this, the whole pictures things, I liked it in terms of the idea. I don't remember the pace and stuff because it was so long ago, but actually it's a good point. If there was that much of a concern, because I do remember the whole only look if do you want to see it, Because I don't think it was something that was maybe like, I'm going to give you this now. I think it was more, would you like to see it? And it was like, and then people were like humming and hawing a bit whether they wanted it. I don't remember it taking that long, but I mean,
no, it didn't take hugely long. It was just the break in the rhythm,
kind of pausing it up. I mean, the thing is, like, I would say generally I don't mind breaking things up. Like if you're doing handouts and stuff, it's going to make a break, full stop. But I think the difference probably from what you're talking about here versus showing the tin of beans, I mean, you could pause the narrative. It's not a criticism. If you listening have got your own games and you do handouts quite a lot, that's okay. It doesn't screw your game over. But the difference with this, at least from my memory and from what you've said, because some of it's kind of coming back now that you're talking about it, is there was the whole thing like, oh, you sure? I'm not sure if I should show you. This is all summarised, but it was kind of like, I don't know if I should. Should we know? Here, I'll pass it round. It's all kind of like, everyone's like, sure, they had a look and stuff at this picture of some dead guy. But there was a lot of that kind of, I guess, maybe the issue was rather than it just being a thing where we're happy to pause and look at the handouts, it was a case where we're taken completely out of the game because there was this other concern about the content, and then if that's going to be the thing, why is it in the game in the first place, you know? Now I like really scary, nasty content in games. Like I'm a big fan of it. Delta Green's a game that's got awesome scenarios, but they're very suggestive in terms of their creature designs and stuff like that for some of them. But it's a total blast. I love all that stuff. It's great. It's spooky. It's horrible. It's nasty. You want to run away. But I never feel like it goes that extra too far where potentially we're getting... I mean, the extreme of what Jamie's talking about would be like gore pictures, like real gore getting shown and stuff would be the kind of even further than what we've seen. And at that point, I suppose, what's the point? If you're worried about it, why are you doing it?
Why is it there?
And certainly for the games that I'll be running for you guys very shortly, there will be plenty of violence in it. And I ain't doing no X card, but then we know each other, and I know, and I also know I'm not going to go too far with folk. Like I know what the guys' kind of baselines would be, especially with some of the more controversial stuff that they might have run, like the sex bot.
It wasn't. We were told in no uncertain terms. It wasn't.
Do you know what's funny though? I was looking at Mothership, and I think there's a sex bot class or something, because I've been looking at Mothership recently. It might be an NPC you can get, but anyway, it's funny because it made me think of that game.
Who was it that shared that PDF with us again?
Yeah, that was the main man. Although it turns out Mothership rules, if you want a good scary game, Mothership is awesome from the rules I've seen. It does a lot of things that Alien does, or vice versa. But I think it's completely free to get the player survival guide, and it's completely free. You can get it in Drive Through RPG. Turns out our guy had it, so I read a lot of that book. I mean, it's not that big, but I had a blast, and it's definitely a fun one to play. It's dead hardcore though, so if you don't like hardcore, it's not your game. So okay, I think then that is something, because I do vaguely remember the whole stuff with the pictures. That's the only thing, I think, other than that, there might have been the Bible quotes either read out or it was the tins of food. There might have been other pictures shown, but that was probably the most extreme part of the game, the human remains. And then I think it ended up, like you said, it was some boss fight or some supernatural element in there. There was one thing that was interesting that I spoke to my colleague on completely separate note, because he was talking about some of this and he mentioned the Franklin expedition, and he talked about how I think it was found a massive distance. The ship was found a huge distance away, completely submerged in the ice. That made it even weirder, you know. So it was pretty cool. But I was sitting going, I know someone that ran a game, and he's like, what do you mean run a game? I mean, the guy's like double my age or something, so he's maybe not, he's not that old actually, but he's not far off it, give or take 5 to 8 years or something. But he's like, what do you mean a game? And I'm going, doesn't matter, you won't understand. He's like, you're not too old for games. I'm like, you're crossing the line, man, just wrap it. I'm not going to help you out with your PowerPoint if you keep this up. But anyway, so I don't know, is there anything else with that one? If not, I can jump on to the
I think that was the kind of the key elements of it. And again, a kind of sub component of that is that when the DM is going, oh, you don't need to look, you know, if you don't want to, and you could see that he was a bit upset and disturbed by what he'd seen in the documentary. So when you've got the person that's supposed to be crafting the scary situation from you, who themselves are a bit fearful of it or upset by it, then it kind of kills a bit of the mood, I think. So top tip for anybody who's out there: if you are terrified of the storyline that you're going through with your players, have a good poker face.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I do enjoy cringe. So if somebody, even if it's not like that's cringy, quote unquote, but rather like someone cringes because of something that they're uncomfortable with, I do enjoy that. I do enjoy it when someone like rolls a 1 and they go, oh, and you see them seize up and you're like, they rolled a 1, it's good. Alright then, I think what I'll maybe do, I'm going to go back, I'm going to turn the time machine on and go back to one of the first, it might have been the first game I ever played, like role-playing game. And it was my dad who got us in. It was ourselves, basically it was me, my brother, sister, my dad, and there was a couple of kind of friends of the family that were there. Was there more of us though? I think that was it for this game. And we were doing a game called Esoterrorists. I've not really played a lot of it other than some of the games with the family, because it's like point by spend systems, like point buys. You know, I'm not that into them. I prefer the skill based stuff and like things like D&D. But basically it was the first ever kind of scary game we'd done. It wasn't particularly scary, but it was fun. You know, it was good. It was my first experience with D&D. But there was one bit in it where I think we're approaching the boss or something to do with some big baddie, and I'm sure he was some vampire type monster or something, like he could fly and things, and we were all trying to, I think, running away from him at one point because they were totally mashing us up, and basically we almost died, I'm sure, and as we're running away it was like we heard something on the car flapping its wings, and one of the other players just made us all go nuts because we were already in this state of like, oh crap, we need to get out of here. And then like one of the other players was like, oh my god, it's on the car, and then all of us went nuts for like, what we're gonna do? I had no bullets, I'm trying to reload and all that, like, and everyone else is panicking. It was a lot of fun. So I mean, it wasn't like we're shaking, oh we're so scared, but we were actually just such a high tense moment, and my dad did a great job of just building all that up. And I think, I'm sure, unless I've added this as like a false memory, I'm sure someone turned around and just like blasted at the back of the car to shoot out the windshield or something to kill this flying enemy that was on our tails. And it turned out what it was somebody's jacket get stuck in the car door and was flapping against the car and all that. And that was all. It was just a wee false, a false positive, whatever.
Red herring.
Yeah, a red herring. And it was dead fun. Like, it's definitely a horror themed game, but it was a moment, actually, probably more so than the rest of the game. We were just at such a heightened sense of kind of stress because we were all getting battered, and we knew that we were going to go down in a hit or two if we were hit. And in the chase sequence, we barely got away, if I remember right, and then that hit us after it. It was just, there was a good level of crafting going on, and sure, I think part of that as well is something like that wouldn't have been planned. You know, knowing my dad anyway, it wasn't planned. But it's something where improvisation as a GM is actually super important.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, that as an element, it then means that because the tension is getting built, then when you get to that moment and you get the kind of false encounter, everybody is reacting to it as if it's real, to then discover afterwards that it wasn't, but that's because everybody's bought into what's going on, because all he's talked about is a flapping at a window and everybody's went, flying enemy, right, close it. Oh no, it's just because your jacket gets stuck in the door.
Yeah,
mysterious.
I do remember in that game going, someone get it, I'm reloading, someone get it, and I'm like, I think I fumbled with something, I couldn't reload it in time and stuff, because there's times even in our normal D&D games, well, they're not really horror, you know, one of us might say something and then it's like we just spiral into this whole conspiracy theory. Now sure, it's very different in this high pressure stress moment, but it's the same sort of thing that happens where it's like you take one little kind of bit of the bait and you make up your own story. And I think actually, especially in horror games, it's good to kind of allow your players to give them time during scares or build up to actually let them start making up their own things in their head. All he said was there was a flapping, I'm sure. Oh, my dad said, was it was like a flapping noise or something. There was nothing to indicate it was a monster coming, because I think everything preceding that, preceding even, gave the idea that we got away, you know, and so we had that rest, and then we decided to just make it go. I remember Dad laughing his head off, because he's just like, these guys don't have a clue about that. Because I mean, half the time we're saying, oh, we know he's up to something because he's smiling, you know. But that's one of the things, like, give your players time to think of that stuff. A big reason why that worked, in the way I see it, 'cause it's the same with horror films that overuse jump scares, or overuse the fake jump scare where you turn, oh, there's nothing there, but they turn back and then the ghost is there, even though there was nothing behind them in the first place, and it's done. But one thing that my dad had done during that was he did not have there wasn't any kind of scenario like that before that point, so it meant that we were completely suckered by it when it actually happened, as well, because you can overuse your jump scares, you can overuse, and if you want something to be scary, like a monster's reveal, you don't reveal the monster 7 times, you know, because by the 7th time it's not scary anymore. But if you do it the first time, then cool, you know, it's good. So maybe it's not the best kind of thing to compare it against, because you should probably be describing your monsters. But when it comes to plot twists, for example, if everything's a red herring, you know, and then you always bait and switch them at the players at the end, then it means you're never going to get the same impact. And that's something for that game that worked really well, at least from what I remember, but we're speaking like 6-7 years ago or something now. But it still sticks with me. That's how good it was.
Yeah, but again, like you're talking about the kind of, if you overdo a jump scare, if you this, that, whatever, if you overdo anything, then you're gonna desensitize the players to it. And again, pick any technique you want for driving a story, or pick any technique you want for creating horror or surprise or suspense or whatever. If you do it all the time, then the players get better at spotting that element quicker.
Like the patterns, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so like with a jump scare, like if you've never seen one before, you'll get caught out when it happens. But the more and more and more you get it, then you start to pick up on the subtle things like, oh, the camera is slowing down when it's moving through the scene. Yeah. And oh, the music has changed.
Yeah, why is the framing set so someone could stand behind that person? Oh,
yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly. So you start to spot the little bits and pieces, but then it takes away the impact. Now, whether it's because you're consciously sitting picking up on it, or subconsciously you pick up on it, then the same is happening when you're going through and you're working through your story. So when you're setting up the jump scare or the false reveal or whatever it so happens to be, the players are going to pick up on it quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker, which basically means they're sitting there going, oh, didn't see that coming, nudge nudge, wink. They know they're there already. So if you've got a variety of different tools, different techniques to pick from, then you're keeping them on their toes, because you're not giving them the chance to get used to something, so that they start to spot the patterns quicker. And as well as that, even if they do know the patterns and can spot it, they're still going to have a point where they go, right, okay, well, if this and this happens, there's an outcome. If this and this happens, there's another outcome. So you're still keeping them on their toes, because they're sensing different ways it could get pulled or pushed.
Yeah, I think there's something as well, like, as a GM, you'll probably have your way of doing things, and if you do catch people, because they'll probably say it, like, they'll go, oh, I seen that coming, you know, or they'll go, oh, like there was a game, we're going to come on to that in a second, so I won't say it now, but basically, like, it's going to happen sometimes where people suss out what you're doing, and that might not be because you're doing it wrong. It's not always your fault. I mean, sometimes you just are into a pattern of it. Some players are super perceptive. Some players have played a lot of games. Some have run a lot of games. I tend to find a lot of these patterns in people quite quick when I hear their games. But if you do find that's happening a lot with your players, that's when to spice it up. That's when to change that just change the pattern a bit, just flip and switch it on them, and then it'll put them back on the back foot again. And that's it. I mean, it's fun, but most importantly, have fun when you're. See if you get into the horror stuff and you kind of try and give that to your players, whether it's the way you tell it or you're physical with your hands and stuff. It's going to try and immerse people a bit more, because storytelling, less so I'd say than any other type of game that I've run. Horror games I personally find really, really hard to run, because one, I don't really get scared myself, so I don't. It's hard for me to know, okay, what would scare you, you know. But it also relies the most on things like actually you need to set the scene, you need to do the build up, you need to do reveals, you need to be able to do the twists and the shock values and all that stuff, and it takes a lot more work than practically any D&D game that I've done that wasn't horror themed. I mean, I've ran a campaign for a year, and most, I think probably the latter half of them, or the latter quarter, were prepared in like 20-30 minutes a night, and that was 4, 5, 6 hours of games in 30 minutes, just because I was so used to it. Whereas horror, I can't really do that with so much, because it's harder to do. But
yeah, and just kind of talking and focusing on that, like, for me personally as well, like, I think horror is the hardest thing to do, because like, what scares you isn't going to be what scares me, isn't going to be what scares somebody else, or, you know, whatever. And it just, when you were talking about that there, it just a kind of total side shoot of what we're talking about just now, but on the point of what scares you is completely different to what scares me. Like, recently I was talking with my dad, and he retold me a story about what happened to somebody he went to school with. So this is, you know, back in the 60s or whatever, and in a British school, for anybody who's watching or listening overseas and things, so it's all very, you know, do something wrong, get belted, you know, all that sort of stuff. And during the time that my dad was at school, in his school there was a shortage of teachers, so they brought people back out of retirement. So like the last time that they taught was like in the 40s or 50s, so it's even more regimented, and, you know, all that kind of thing. So anyway, it was during summer, and a bee or a wasp flew into class, and the boy that was in the front desk at him started panicking, like over panicking and flapping and trying to swat this bee and wasp away. And even when it was nowhere near him, he was still like full blast trying to get it away from him. The teacher then is shouting at him to calm down. The phrase "you're acting like a girl" gets used. He gets taken out eventually. He ends up like trying to cover himself on the desk, like hands over, and then eventually takes out belted, like, sent back to his seat, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, the long and the short is that the boy's mum comes up to the school and goes apoplectic at the teacher and with the head teacher and things, because as it turned out, when he was a really young kid, he kicked a football into like a bee's hive or a hornet's nest, and he got swamped with them, and he ended up in hospital and nearly died. So that bee coming in, you know, back in the days before anybody knew or cared about post-traumatic stress disorder, so he went through that experience and that panic that everybody else was not reacting to. Yeah, and that's what he went through. So like, something as small and as trivial as a bee or a wasp could be enough to have somebody having palpitations at the other end of the table.
Well, I've had people that are scared of spiders. I didn't know this at the time, and we had spider props. Well,
is that for legal reasons, or?
Well, this is the guy I sent locusts to his house because I was told it'd be dead funny, and I found out it was. Well, I didn't find this out until a long time later. But it's not just spiders he's scared of. He's scared of insects as well. And I sent him a bag of 50 massive locusts. Like, I mean, they're speaking about half the size of your finger in terms of length, the smallest. But I know, but even the games with spiders in it, you can see actual discomfort. So I'm kind of like, well, we know these guys and we know he's okay with it, but he gets freaked out. So we're kind of like, cool. I never took the spiders out because I don't care that much. I still want them to be uncomfortable, but I just took out a lot of the real details and stuff. I would just say it attacks him instead of talks about it grappling them with his with their legs and eating them with his fangs and all that. I just took out all that stuff.
Wrapping them in web.
And the thing is, there was a web skill in there to restrain people. But I mean, the way I just censored the game in a way that probably people didn't notice, because I wasn't removing the spiders. I planned it. I'm not changing it. But I just took out the details. I just removed the reference to that, and I moved to more game jargon, which I tend to not do because I think jargon just gets pretty boring. It's not as immersive. But in that case, it's better to just take away some of that immersion to give people a bit more comfort if it does kind of upset them and things. Now, he's not anywhere near as bad as the person you were talking about, but it's just an example of maybe how I've needed to censor that.
But again, that's the thing. So, like, for most people, turning around in the game and going, and then a giant bee comes in the room. Like, most people are going, wait.
Why?
What? Why? Right? Is this not? When does the horror start looking at their watches and things? Whereas that person at the other end of the table's just fainted. You know, you go, well. And again, for most people, it isn't going to be something as small and as innocuous as that. But there's, physically a bee flew in the window with him. But talking about you with your game, even the mention of a spider is enough to start having that person on edge. So you go, right, well, that's a very, to you and I, it's a small thing, but to them it's huge. So how do you take the person that's reacting to something small and get them along in the journey while still making the person who needs something big to react to, and how do you get them all feeling scared?
Yeah, I think this is the same thing though, because this is where I suppose the X card comes in, right? The thing with that game was I cleared the content of this game with everyone, and they're like, yeah, no problem. I said it's going to be a creature feature type thing, you know. I suggested spiders, but I didn't want to spoil it, so I said think of your 8-legged freak type things. Now that obviously is a huge spoiler, the spiders, but they weren't I knew that would be something that made them think insects and stuff, and they're like, it's cool, I don't care. But for the most part, like, I mean, even in a different scale, like I talked about Cult having a lot of certain stories having a lot of abuse in it, a Cult Divinity Lost, and so that sort of stuff is, people have had trauma in life, anything close to that, those sort of playing games that even suggest it, makes that completely unplayable. You know, but that's where the X card doesn't solve that issue. You know, that's something that should be resolved even before considering an X card. You know, because that's like, if I'm going to play a game that might have, I've not really played one game I've ran that had kind of graphic kind of stuff of a kind of more sexual nature, just more like police cases and stuff and things. But it's still enough for me to go, cool, that's something that people might find really, really hard as a topic, even if you've not had any issues around or trauma around that. It's just, it's not a very pleasant thing, like murder cases, you know, and all that, and anything that's kind of somewhat Hellraiser-esque in terms of like, I don't want to get into it. But basically, a lot of stuff, really, I think you should be able, if there's anything you're not sure about, I mean, number one, you shouldn't probably be running really potentially dubious or offensive games with strangers, for example. I just don't think you should do it. Now, it's different. You might be doing a organised play event, or you might be at a convention, or you might be playing at a local comic shop. But the other thing to think about is, if there is going to be strangers there, you still need to clear what you're playing by them.
Yeah.
And there was people at the comic shop I used to go to that they would do pretty graphic sex scenes and things in the shop, and I'm going, why? What's the need for that? Not that I was like, oh, that's disturbing content, but I'm just going, but what's the purpose of that other than to get something out of it? It just seems a bit weird. But the other part of it as well is, we're doing this in public. Do you know what I mean? It's like, guys, come on. So in terms of like how you bring people along for the ride, well, well, if you pull it out or you find it,
bad choice of words there.
Yeah. If you figure out the issue before the game starts, you can make reasonable modifications to have it work. I could have taken spiders out of that game and made it insects or practically anything else, and it would have still been the same game. It could have been rats. I could have just made it that they had sludge from the sewers or something. Anything to, I could have still done the restraining effects and things. And that could have been pulled out before the game. Now, and I suppose not everyone will agree with me about the X card thing. I just don't see the need for it, because I've never, in the hundreds of games I've probably run, and potentially close to thousands of, or at least 1,000 hours of games that I've played or ran, I've never had anything like that need to come up, you know. And it's probably because I clear anything with people before I do it in the first instance, and then I don't go into detail anyway for things that are like really could be uncomfortable. But anyway, so that's what I think. But cool. I think then what I'm interested to know, so you've spoke about the Franklin expedition. Is there anything else that you've got, any games horror themed that you have an experience of that you'd like to maybe share for Halloween?
Yeah, well, a kind of more Halloweeny, if that's a real term, game was a game that we played even further back than the Franklin expedition. So this would be maybe, what would that be, about 4 years ago now, maybe, I guess.
That was probably about 4 years ago, and I think I know the game you're going to talk about, and I have like zero recollection of this game. I mean, that's how far back it was. You know? So in this game, it was a one shot that we done, and we were using D&D as the system, 5e, and it was a completely kind of from scratch one shot that the author had came up with. So we were part of a kind of like a cavalry type unit that was sent out to this kind of frontier town because there was fighting and skirmishing going on. So we were there to basically kind of ring fence this little town, keep it secure, give it some security, go out, do patrols, and kind of, you know, maintain the frontier, essentially, is what we were doing. So kind of maybe some kind of Western themes in that sense, and maybe some kind of First World War kind of vibes from it, but two sides kind of fighting over territory and not really gaining a lot and not really losing a lot. So kind of wee bits of that, but it was also kind of, again, going back to the Arctic, out in the kind of tundra, that kind of feel. So we first turn up, and then you're doing the usual. You're kind of trying to figure out, you know, what's been happening. Is there other troops here that we can use for, you know, helping us maintaining security, and you know, so you're doing all the usual stuff, and you're in a tavern of all places in D&D. Who would have guessed? So we're in, and we're talking to different people and just trying to get the lay of the land, and then from outside a scream. What could that be? So we all go out, investigate, and then there's somebody that's been brutally attacked, and it looks like it's been from a wild animal. So, oh dear, right? This kind of rings a bell. This bit, the bit you were telling me earlier, it was like barely, there was maybe a misty thing there, but this whole thing about an animal seems to remind me.
So that was the first thing, and you know, obviously you're there and you're playing the game and things, so rather than, my goodness, this woman was attacked by a bear, and you know, that being that terrible accident, you're all sitting going, right, okay, what's actually going on here? And again, kind of touching on Jordan, the conspiracy theories start you know, rattling about, so we start trying to puzzle out what's going on, and so we start going down that line, and right, okay, did anybody see it? Well, that person there was in the street, and when we came out they disappeared, so we're going and we're trying to find them and things, and then shock horror, when we eventually catch up with that person, a similar thing has happened to them, and right, okay, something's different going on here, blah blah blah. Eventually, through a series of puzzling and, you know, detective work, we then go, I know what's going on here. It's werewolves. Now I can't remember who comes to that conclusion first. Probably the chameleon, I think.
Probably not me, because I don't even know if I was present for this game.
Just a mannequin was there.
This rings a bell. I get to see when you talked about the whole guy following him.
We played it here. You were definitely here. We didn't turn up uninvited. You were definitely here.
I know. I wake up in the middle of the night going, "Who's in my living room? You guys are playing D&D."
Don't worry about it. Go back to sleep. The real horror game.
Yes.
So anyway, so puzzle out it's werewolves. Oh dear, how terrible. So we think we're dealing with one. I think a little bit of combat happened,
right.
And then hey, we've dealt with it, and then in the distance you hear a howl, and then oh no, there's more, and on that goes, to the point that we end up kind of in different positions about the town, and we kind of try and pile things up and kind of fortify it as best as we can. But what's happening is, in the woods kind of just outside the town, the werewolves are all gathered in there, and there's loads of them. There's I can't even remember how many it was. And then like every so often you'd get a glimpse of the eyes, like, and the light when they're moving about, and different things to set up the tension of this impending attack. And then when it happened and when it started, it was kind of wave after wave after wave after wave. And then again, eventually, I can't 100% remember how it resolved, but managed to make it to kind of daybreak, because that's what you were fighting towards, because you're going, as soon as it's daytime they'll lose their powers, hold on to hope. And that's what we managed to do. And again, because it was the one shot, I think that's where it left, rather than there was a kind of overall outstanding victory for us, and that every werewolf was gone and things like that. We also had a limited supply of like silver bullets and things that we conveniently managed to find, which was the other thing that you were factoring in. You were going, right, okay, use the silver bullet and you'll do a decent amount of damage, but use the regular ammunition, which we've got more of when they're further away. So you're kind of trying to puzzle out tactically what the best thing to do was, whilst getting hit by wave after wave, and so you're getting put under a bit of stress and a bit of pressure to try and figure out what the best thing to do was. And again, managed to make it to morning and survive, and that was the game. So you don't remember anything from it, so
no,
it's pointless asking you what you found.
Well, what I think I found, and maybe the scariest thing about this game, is I'm pretty sure werewolves are immune to damage unless it's silver or magical damage, so we're probably doing bugger all with those weapons until we use silver bullets. But that's assuming that we actually, the DM actually used those rules. But I mean, it sounds like for me what would have probably worked for it was the build up from maybe a bit of I find investigation, and I'll come on to, I was going to talk about something different, but I'll actually use this one instead. But I actually sometimes find the actual story and the build up is what gives all the payoff. It's what makes the fight worth it. And I don't know if that's maybe what happened with that game. I can't remember if it was, maybe there was sufficient enough of all the extra stuff that when the fight happened it felt like an unstoppable wave. It probably just felt like, oh god, here's another 7 of them, because I find D&D combat quite often feels like that, full stop. But I can't remember. So.
I mean, the thing with it was, what was good was that when the kind of initial sort of like the sell for the game was, it's going to be a one shot, let's just do, at that time that was I think the kind of highest level characters we'd played at that point, so so we'd kind of got a sort of bump up in terms of the levels, because before we were doing relatively low level characters and we were kind of changing settings and kind of shorter campaigns, nothing too long, and as well nothing that we weren't getting a lot of stuff to juggle and try to remember. So we were playing, in fact it was level 7 I think in our long term campaign now. We've only relatively recently hit that sort of mark and beyond.
I think it took several months to get from either 6 to 7 or 7 to 8.
Yeah.
I mean months.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, my God, when are we going to level up, man? Now that was scary, because I'm sitting going, if I'm not level flaming 10 before I die, I'm going to be pretty mad. So, but probably still get another 2 years before we get there.
Possibly. So, at that time it was well in advance of what we'd done before as well. So the sell was, you'll turn up, it'll be a one shot, playing higher level characters, just a bit of fun filling in time, because I've not got anything sort of bigger and longer to
phrasing.
Yeah, exactly.
Is this you told me off earlier for talking about pulling out?
Yeah, well, we all make mistakes. So that was kind of how it was sold to us. So we're thinking, right, okay, cavalry unit turning up to a frontier town to kind of help fortify and secure. So my sort of thought process was turn up, do a bit of speaking, talking, and then the town's going to get raided, and then we're going to have to defend it, which is kind of what happened, but in a different way. So I'm thinking kind of standard combat between two opposing groups, and there you go. But then with the first attack with the woman, initially you're thinking, right, is it an accident? Is it not an accident? Is it an animal? Is it not an animal? Is this a distraction for what's actually going to happen later on? Then when you find the second one, you go, right, okay, although you need to deal with the security of the place and any potential attacks and things, this is now becoming more of an issue. And then eventually discovering it's a werewolf, and then thinking that you've dealt with it, and then getting the next level of dealing with it. Everything did have a nice pace, and it did build. And just as you were puzzling something out, you get thrown a little curveball, and then just as you were puzzling that out, you get thrown another curveball. So everything was nice from that point of view. And then again, unfortunately, like you're saying, when it comes to combat in D&D, things tend to take a while. So that pace, which was nice up to that point, the puzzling out aspect of it, the detective work, when you hit that bigger combat, then it slowed, and then eventually sort of stopped and fizzled, and it killed a bit, which was unfortunate, because everything up to that point was good. And again, like, because the town was essentially surrounded, you could have been getting attacked from all different angles, but again, the memory of it, and it's a bit dusty going so far back, was that you were occasionally getting a sort of pot shot fired at you, because in this setting werewolves can use guns. So you were getting occasional pot shot at you that was coming in a random direction, but any time that they were kind of rushing to charge, to attack, it was always in the same direction, rather than the way it was kind of described and set up was it was almost kind of panoramic.
Mm-hmm. So
rather than like three of them charging at the one time from a kind of left, middle and right, and then you're going, right, okay, I need to deal with three different angles, and you're under pressure from that, but you're also going, right, if I move position so that tactically I'm in the best place with dealing from an attack from the middle, I'm vulnerable from the left or the right or whatever. So that didn't really happen, because they all came from the same direction. So it was a case of, right, well, let's hope that the kind of pot shot doesn't hit me,
mm-hmm.
and if I can survive the pot shot before the rush attack, then I'm sorted, I'm fine. The easiest way to do that, as I found, was to go up on top of a roof and lie down, wait until you hear the shot, and then stand back up and then see what was going on. That was my tactic. That's how I survived. But again, unfortunately, the combat, because you need to go around everybody and things, it just put the brakes on a little bit. And again, that little element of the town is essentially being ambushed, but then the ambush wasn't as thought out potentially as it could have been, because again, if you had the different directions of attack, then you would then need to grab your stuff and move and reposition and do whatever to deal with it, which then would lead you to a problem at another point. So it's keeping your brain engaged, because if you just stay in the same spot and just kind of plug away at it, you're not going to make it. So you need to kind of be thinking about the combat rather than just flicking through a sheet and going, right, what's the most powerful thing I can do? Oh, it's this, right? Spam, 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 and hope that you make it through, and hope that your dice rolls are better than another person.
It kind of sounds a bit like maybe you're not into the combat as much like myself, because the fact is, really, when you're running these games, there's things that will put the brake on the pace. Like if even if it's something as simple as you're like, oh crap, I can't remember the name of that character. Do you know what I mean? Or a player doesn't actually know what they're doing with a character. I've had that a lot with new players or players that have inherited different characters or new NPCs. So it's not a punishable offence by any means if you're wherever you're listening or watching. But certainly I find combat can be the one thing that does slow things down a bit, and that's where the build, as long as the build up is really good, the payoff almost, that kind of release of that is like that can happen during that combat, and it kind of makes up, the rest of it makes up for the worst combat. I don't remember this one, but if it was basically a wave survival, which I just don't like, and that's just me, I just don't like them. It's one of these things I can let when you're getting it done. This is why I prefer games like Call of Cthulhu and stuff, where combat's much faster, much more brutal. There's more actions in combat in Cthulhu because you're really effectively getting 2 turns every single round, with your dodge or fight back. If anyone has played it that's listening, you'll probably find with one of the games that you'll be playing soon, combat will get messy, but it'll be probably fairly short before people start dying. But the other game, which was the one you mentioned about the whole army type thing, that's going to be the opposite. So be prepared, because you probably won't enjoy the combat. It's fun combat, it's over the top, but if you're not into the subject matter, I won't go into what it is now, but if you're not into the subject matter, it'll probably feel a slog. It's also very flaming complicated. I've ran it maybe 6 or 7 times, I'm still like, oh god, which is why I'm keen to do that one last, so I can get prep for it. But yeah, cool. Alrighty then, I think I'll maybe talk about one of mine. I think maybe I've got one more, but I'm going to stick with the D&D theme. I was going to do a different one, and I've spoke about this one in particular, one of the more recent episodes, or maybe one, well, we've spoke about it recently to each other, if not in an episode. And it was a Curse of Strahd game that I'd done with the Baba Lysaga, for those who have played it. What was so good, this was like that. I was desperate to play a horror game for a long time at that point, because I was doing so much D&D, and I was so sick of it. But really this example more kind of iterates what we've spoke about, where we had an amazing fight sequence for her, and it was brutal. I mean, she was kicking the total crap out of my players. Our house then got up and started chucking rocks at them. Like it was crazy. It was nothing like the fight we just spoke about. And actually, as much as I don't like big epic fight sequences as much, probably because I'm not as good at running them, probably, I guess. But with this one, I was really quite happy with it, and it was brutal. It was down to the bone with the players versus my character, and I got away. They're going to be so mad when she comes back later on. But with the case of the actual build-up, what tickled the kind of horror bone for me was actually as soon as they got to the ruins of Berez, which is where Baba Lysaga resides in the Curse of Strahd. It's all about this battle-worn area. If I remember right, I might be getting mixed up with locations, but it was a battle-worn area. There were scarecrows everywhere. There was like rotten houses, old peasant houses or farmhouses, even maybe not peasant houses. Eventually they went over to these weird ruins, they went over to these weird standing stones. There was this woman there, this weird woman that was there and saying, oh, there's something evil here and all that, and they're going, what is going on? And what I found really helped for the players was I was basically not telling them bugger all for that. I was going, I don't know what's going on, and I'm like, making them do perception checks, and they hear movement and they look round. What was happening was the animated scarecrows that kind of roam in that area were stoating about and things, so they were hearing all of this. they were thinking this woman was evil. They thought this was the witch that they were warned about, and she was something to do with some other group. It was spying on the witch, I think. So anyway, I had the players guessing, like, because they basically came to this place on a whim, on a clue, and I thought they'd never see this area, and I was gutted when I thought that was going to happen, and then they ended up going. And it became a place where they heard so much about it, there was so much build up, and they got there and it was like, there's nothing here, and it totally just pulled the rug from under them. But what ended up happening was, there was something there, and they'd seen this woman in the middle of the farm, taking a goat into her hut and things like that, and they're going, wait, I thought this was the witch that they're speaking to, and the woman's like, I'm not a witch, I've told you. But anyway, they're just having a laugh with the NPC. But that's where it was like, they were already so lost with what's going on that they were high tense and they were dropped down, and they're like, oh, we can breathe, and they see this woman taking a goat in. Eventually they end up spying on her, and that ended up being Baba Lysaga. And they spied on her through the window. She had crows in cages in front of her house, and a big floating troll skull or giant skull. It doesn't really matter for the story, but there was that there, so it was weird, and they're going, what the hell is this place? But in particular, the crows were something that they're just like, what is going on? Because crows in this game, up until that point, my players, I'd intentionally got them associating that with Strahd, who would constantly polymorph into crows. You had to spy on them and stuff because I wanted them to do that, and the players were so paranoid at this point, they were all shooting crows and stuff. Meanwhile, they see all these crows locked up and they're going, this person must hate Strahd. They were wrong. Anyway, they spy through on this old woman, and she's like in the bath and they can't see what's going on, but everything was so weird, and it wasn't until right at the kind of big moments would they actually start telling them what they're properly seeing. They would see her bathing behind this kind of semi-translucent kind of curtain and things like that. So I think what really worked for that, the players were like, what the hell is going on? And I don't mean in a frustrated sense of I don't get this, but they were sitting going, do we engage with this? This is too weird. This could be the big evil witch who could kill us. And it was awesome. But the bit that really got them was when she started speaking to this little doll that was in the... No, it was a wee boy from what they thought it was a doll, and she came out of the bath and she was nice looking, attractive, and she got herself dressed and started speaking to this doll and all that. Eventually they get the confidence to go in, and they're like, what the hell is going on, missus? This is weird, man. And she's like, oh, hello, strangers, whatever it is. What is it you want? Blah, blah, and did that conversation. But when they went to look at the doll, it was a wee boy, and they're going, what is going on? Like, I kept twisting what was going on in that game. I don't need to go much further. Basically, a lot of that was happening. She would engage with them. They had a good conversation with her, and it wasn't actually going to go hostile. But it was good because I totally had them guessing the whole time, and it wasn't like I was like trying to subvert their expectations all the time or anything. I was just not giving them all the info, which I think is actually a pretty good tool when you're doing horror, in particular Call of Cthulhu games, Lovecraft stories. They all use that unknown element. The King in Yellow has a cosmic part of it, but part of that cosmic element, or the big cosmic element of it, is the vagueness of it that helps kind of encourage all that kind of what is going on here. And I found that personally, running it, I was loving their faces during the game, but I know from a player's perspective, when that's happened to me, there's a Delta Green game I'm watching online right now called Impossible Landscapes. I've seen about 16 episodes or something, let's say, it's been about 32 hours worth of content. I still don't have a goddamn clue what is going on in that game, and I love it because I just know the dangers everywhere. So vagueness is a tool, basically, I think that's actually super cool.
And again, depending on when this is released and what episodes you've listened to, again, one of our episodes we talk about using vagueness in your game, and again, the danger is that it becomes too vague, and the danger is that when you've got a player that's questioning what's going on, like Jordan was saying, that it becomes a case of they've not got an idea, and that the questions are, like you're saying, coming out of frustration rather than the questions are coming out of the fact that they're thinking about everything that's happening, and it's keeping them engaged. So I think it's really, really easy to fall to the wrong side of the line, and it's very hard to walk across that tightrope.
Certainly cosmic horror games, I've seen a lot and played a lot of them, and a lot of the time I'm just going, God, it's actually bordering unpretentious. I mean, things like the vagueness and things, actually it's a good point, because that was something I was very worried about during the game. But what I would do was I'd drop some of the vagueness, and if players wanted more info they could ask for it. I'd maybe make them do a check, but I wouldn't give them everything. I just gave them more of what they were after until they were satisfied with it. Like with the the witch bathing, or Baba Lysaga bathing, I said she had like red bath soap and all that. You could see she was like bubbling up this kind of, it looked like red bubble bath that you can get. You know, actually what it was the blood of the goat that she cut its throat into the big basin, because that was her offering to the mother, the night mother, or whatever the lore is for it again in Strahd. But I had all that going, so eventually when they got in, one of them, when they were talking with her, one of them snuck round to see what was going on, and they seen a dead goat behind the bath and blood, and they were just like, what the hell? And then there was a whole sequence of them trying to tell each other that this is dangerous and all that without alerting her. It just added all these elements, but I let them discover the punchlines. I didn't give them. But there was cases where they'd say, I don't know what's going on, and they asked for checks and stuff. So if you want to do vague, I totally recommend it for horror, but don't completely restrict what info people can get. Just think about how you can give it in stages, and have narrative reasons in there. I speak about doing narrative things all the time. Have narrative reasons in there that means people can't get all the info. Like I said, it's covered by a curtain. You can't see in it because it's below your eye line, and it's in it's in a bath out of your eye line, and it's covered by a curtain. So you're only seeing this woman bathe, which is weird in itself. And anyway, it ended up being a great game. So really enjoyed it.
And again, like just kind of going back to Jordan talking about vague and being vague in games, I think it's important to point out there's a difference between being vague and something being ambiguous. You know, at least when it's ambiguous, there's one or two outcomes or however many outcomes, whereas vague normally means that, you know, there's so little detail that there isn't any direction that the player feels that they can go in. So just watch for when ambiguous turns into vagueness. If
you get it wrong, then just tell your players it's their fault. That's what I've seen a lot of GMs do. I don't do that, because they end up fighting me anyway, so they end up finding out all the answers. But anyway, I think then what we'll do then is, do you want to tie off with any last examples? I'll probably not, just for time's sake, but if you have an example you'd like to cover.
I think we've probably kept these poor people long enough when they want to go out and score some chocolate. So
yeah, fair enough. I mean, we've got plenty of story. Well, I've certainly got plenty. I do a lot of horror games, so I've got loads of this stuff I can talk about. So I mean, I could talk all night. So, but I basically, you know, some of the stuff, at least that's our favourite kind of things, or at least the most memorable things that have happened in a horror themed game, or maybe a horror thing that's happened in a non-horror themed game. Like certainly even talking about, I forgot all about that thing about the flapping jacket vampire monster that turned out just to be, well,
that didn't exist.
Yeah, you know, I still remember that several years later. But that's some of our examples, and what I would like to throw over to yourself, whoever's watching or listening. You know, let us know your side of it. Have you got any cool examples to talk about, or as a GM, have you constructed the best horror scenarios you've ever seen in your life? Let us know in the comments. Take us to the socials, I guess.
Yeah, so there's Facebook that you can get us on. There is Twitter that's there. We have a Discord server as well, and there's also Instagram. So tag us in some of your Halloween pictures over on Instagram, and then we can check them out as well.
Yeah. So great. I think just the last thing to say to you all is thanks again for watching or listening wherever you are. Have a happy Halloween, and it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.